When I saw my name next to the kitchen door, while the rest of the family clinked glasses in candlelight, I knew exactly where I stood in their story. So I stood up, walked out, and made a call that would cost my brother's in-laws $40 million. If you've ever been quietly humiliated by your own family, this story is for you. My name is Madison Grant. I'm 38 years old, the founder and CEO of Ether Technologies, a company that began in a cramped one-bedroom apartment and now partners with Fortune 500 giants. From the outside, you might assume my journey has been paved with support, recognition, pride. But the truth is simpler and more painful. I've spent most of my life invisible in the eyes of the people who should have seen me first. My brother Blake and I are only 2 years apart. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, we shared everything: bunk beds, backyard adventures, bowls of Lucky Charms on sleepy Saturday mornings. Our mom Diane packed our lunches in matching brown paper bags, his always with a sports-themed napkin, mine with a post-it note reminding me to smile today. In those early years, things felt fair, equal, safe. But then came middle school and the quiet shift that changed everything. Blake shot up in height, made the varsity basketball team by freshman year, and started showing signs of the athletic greatness my dad had longed for. You could feel the air shift around my father Gregory whenever Blake walked into the room. He stood taller, his voice filled with a kind of pride that made you want to earn it for yourself. I, meanwhile, had fallen in love with machines. More specifically, with an old IBM desktop my uncle gave us when he upgraded. I took it apart the first week I got it. My mother had nearly fainted. But by the end of the weekend, it was reassembled and running faster than before. Just a hobby, my dad muttered when he found me writing lines of code one summer morning. You'll grow out of it once you discover makeup and boys. That same summer, Blake won MVP at his basketball camp. My parents threw a barbecue. Neighbors came. My mom made her famous blueberry pie. I spent the afternoon inside debugging a simple game I designed. When I showed it to them later that night, my dad looked up briefly from the dishes. "That's nice, sweetheart," he said. "You should ask Blake to show you how to do a free throw sometime." It didn't matter that I made the honor roll every semester, or that I was captain of the mathletes and debate club. At home, the measure of value was something else entirely, something I didn't seem to possess. My 16th birthday fell on the same weekend as Blake's state championship game. We never even cut the cake. 3 days later, Mom apologized with a tired hug and a slice of leftover store-bought cheesecake. "You understand, right? This could be Blake's ticket to college," she said, as if my SAT prep and summer robotics courses were just side quests. But I understood perfectly. The gap widened in college. I got into Stanford on a full scholarship for computer science. Blake went to our dad's alma mater on an athletic scholarship, though he barely graduated with a business degree he treated like a necessary chore. Every time I called home to share news, an internship at NVIDIA, a published research paper, my parents would respond with polite disinterest before shifting the conversation back to Blake's latest career. Twist, a marketing gig here. And Firminus.1, assistant coach position there. And yet, I never stopped trying. I once flew home from Palo Alto for Thanksgiving despite having 3 major projects due. At the dinner table, my mother turned to Blake and asked him to say grace, adding, "We're just so proud of everything you're doing." Then she turned to me. "And Madison, how's the weather in California?" I swallowed hard, smiled, and passed the cranberry sauce. Even my graduation was tainted. I was valedictorian. I had practiced my speech for days. My parents arrived 20 minutes late, missing the speech entirely because Blake had a charity golf event with his new company. We almost didn't make it at all. My dad laughed when they arrived, planting a kiss on my cheek. It was always that kind of laugh, the dismissive, indulgent laugh people give you when they don't think you'll ever truly matter. But I did matter. I just didn't know it yet. My 20s were a blur of Silicon Valley hustle. I worked at 3 startups, watching one succeed, one fail, and one be acquired for peanuts. And then at 28, I took the biggest risk of my life. I maxed out my savings, applied for a terrifyingly large business loan, and turned the tiny apartment I rented in San Jose into an office. I called the company Ether. It felt like the unseen substance connecting everything, an invisible thread through which energy flows. I didn't realize then how poetic that choice was. Because I too had been invisible. And now I was building my own current. Those first 2 years were brutal. I ate instant noodles, slept on a pull-out couch, and showered at the gym. My parents rarely called. And when they did, it was to ask if I had considered falling back on a job at Blake's company. "There's always room for you in operations," Dad said one night. "We could use someone like you, detail-oriented." Detail-oriented, not visionary, not brilliant, not courageous. Just useful in a back-office way. When I finally landed my first major client, a mid-sized logistics firm looking to overhaul their entire system, I called home ecstatic. I wanted to hear something, anything. Pride. Joy. A touch of surprise. "That's great," my mom replied. "Now, don't forget to send Blake a card for his promotion." That was Madison Grant's place in the Grant family. Supporting role. Side character. Techie with a nice hobby. But the hobby was about to become something far more powerful. They just didn't know it yet, and to be honest, neither did I. Boston in winter has a way of stripping everything down to its essentials. The wind slices through your coat like it's paper, the sidewalks freeze over, and the cold gets into your bones. But maybe that's what I needed then, something so brutally honest that I couldn't ignore it. I had just turned 30 when I moved there, trading in a cushy mid-level position in San Jose for a one-bedroom rental in a brick walk-up with creaky stairs and spotty heat. Everyone thought I'd lost my mind. My mother called twice a week to ask if I'd given up this phase yet. My father simply said, "There's always a desk waiting at Blake's company. Administrative work is stable, safe." But I didn't want safe. I wanted something that didn't exist yet. The idea came to me during my last few months in California while sitting through another chaotic logistics meeting where a Fortune 100 company was still managing its supply chain using spreadsheets from the early 2000s. Delays. Misinformation. Billions lost annually, and nobody seemed to be building something intuitive, intelligent, and predictive. That night, I sketched the skeleton of Ether Technologies on a napkin. I didn't have investors. No family money. No one asking for my pitch deck. I had my savings, a stubborn kind of hunger, and a borrowed laptop with a cracked trackpad. The early days were brutal. I worked out of coffee shops and libraries, switching seats every few hours to avoid awkward glares from baristas. I coded until my wrists burned and taught myself UI design from YouTube tutorials. I pitched to angels who barely looked up from their phones, their faces glazed over when they realized I wasn't building an app for dating, shopping, or dog walking. There were days I didn't speak to anyone except the cashier at the corner store. Nights when I lay on a thin futon staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. And through it all, the silence from home was deafening. No one called to ask how things were going. No one offered to connect me to contacts. The only thing my father said when I reached out to share a minor prototype success was, "There's still time to come work in operations under your brother." As if my life's work was just a detour until I gave up. But giving up was never an option. I named the project Ether because I remembered the ancient philosophy that ether was the invisible element, the medium through which light and energy moved. That's how I saw supply chains. That's how I saw myself. Not loud, not showy, but quietly moving the world. I focused the software on predictive analytics for mid-size logistics companies, those too big for spreadsheets, too small for SAP. It took 9 months, 6 credit cards, and 2 panic attacks to get the prototype functioning. My first breakthrough came from a LinkedIn message I almost didn't send. It was to Camille Rivera, a COO I'd met once at a Women in Tech event in Palo Alto. Her company, a regional beverage distributor, was bleeding money from missed shipments. I offered her a free 30-day trial of Ether. She agreed. By the end of the month, her numbers improved by 12%. That's when the calls started. Camille posted a glowing review in a small industry newsletter. I still remember the subject line, "The quiet software that saved my quarter." Suddenly, I wasn't invisible anymore. A regional food service company reached out. Then an automotive parts supplier in Indiana. Then a furniture chain out of Ohio. They didn't care that I didn't have a board or office or funding. They cared that Ether worked. By year 2, I had 5 paying clients and 1 part-time developer. We worked from my tiny apartment eating instant noodles and debugging through the night. We didn't have ergonomic chairs, but we had momentum. And that was everything. I sent a short update to my family group chat. Ether just signed its 5th enterprise client. Revenues finally covering expenses. The only response came from my mother. Are you still in Boston cold this time of year? It stung more than I wanted to admit. But I saved that message anyway. Because I knew one day I'd look at it and feel only pride for how far I'd come without applause. The true turning point came in March when we were invited to pitch at the East Coast Tech Futures Conference. I almost didn't apply, figured we were too small, too scrappy. But Camille insisted. You've got the traction. Now get the attention, she said. I wore the only blazer I owned. Walked into the conference hall with trembling hands. I spoke for 7 minutes. Walked through real data, showed them how Ether predicted delays before they happened, how we helped reduce transit costs by 18%, how we adapted in real time to global disruptions. People listened. A week later, we had interest from a VC firm in New York. They didn't invest, not then. But they gave us exposure, introduced us to 3 companies, one of which became our biggest client within 6 months. Suddenly, I had meetings in glass conference rooms and business cards that didn't feel like jokes. Ether was no longer a dream on a napkin. It was a real company. Still lean, still fighting for every contract. But alive. I didn't tell my family. Not because I didn't want to, but because by then I realized I didn't need their validation to believe in my worth. The irony, of course, came later. When Blake called out of the blue asking if I could maybe help consult on their supply chain issues, I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then replied, sure. Send me a scope of work. We'll prepare a quote. No bitterness. No snark. Just business. That was the moment I knew I had crossed over. I had built something out of nothing. Quietly, relentlessly, alone. And maybe, just maybe, I was no longer in anyone's shadow. I was casting one of my own. It started as so many life-changing things do with a LinkedIn message. I was at my usual corner table in a cafe in Back Bay when it came through, a simple connection request from Eleanor Wright, VP of Strategy at Everhart Holdings. I knew the name. Everyone in supply chain tech did. They were a legacy giant, conservative, slow-moving, but loaded with money and inefficiencies. If they were knocking, it meant something was broken. Eleanor didn't waste time. She'd seen our case study in a trade journal. Asked for a call. Within 2 weeks, I was presenting to their leadership team in a sleek conference room that overlooked the Manhattan skyline. I'll be blunt, Eleanor said after my pitch. Your product is better than the top 3 we've tested this year. Cleaner, more predictive. You built this from scratch. I nodded. She smiled. Remind me never to underestimate a founder in a thrifted blazer again. 3 months later, Aether Technologies signed a $40 million multi-year contract with Everhart Holdings. It was our biggest deal by a mile. I celebrated by buying myself a decent office chair and upgrading my ramen to sushi. I didn't plan to tell my family. Not at first. But then something strange happened. During one of the final negotiations, I was on a call with Everhart's CEO, a gruff but sharp man named Richard Merriman. We were reviewing implementation timelines when he paused and said, "Sorry, off topic, but do you happen to know Blake Grant?" The name landed like ice water on my spine. I cleared my throat. Yes. He's my brother. Richard blinked. No kidding. Small world. He's engaged to my niece. Tiffany. Of course, Blake's girlfriend of 2 years. Blonde Ivy League, all pearls and power brunches. I remembered seeing photos of her in my mother's emails, usually accompanied by phrases like, "She's just so elegant," or, "Blake's really found someone of his level." Richard leaned back. Funny he's never mentioned you. Not once. He said it with a half smile, like it didn't mean anything. Like it was just one of those things. But it wasn't. It was everything. Later that night, I lay awake replaying the conversation. Not because I was hurt, no. I'd long moved past expecting Blake to cheer for me, but because it revealed something sharper. Even when my work entered his world, even when I was helping his future in-laws' company, he couldn't bring himself to say my name. There was silence where family pride should have been. Still, the win was real. Aether had arrived. I decided against my better judgment to share the news. I emailed a photo of the signed contract to our family group chat subject line, "We did it." No response for a day. Then my mother wrote, "That's great, honey. Have you picked a dress yet for Blake's wedding? The theme is cream and gold." That was it. Not congratulations. Not, "We're proud of you." Just a reminder to not clash with the decor. For the first time in a long time, I didn't cry. I didn't scream into a pillow or call Ethan, my partner, to dissect the hurt. I just stared at the message. And I laughed. Because it wasn't funny, not really. But it was absurd. Like some cosmic joke that kept getting told. You in a contract that validates everything you've sacrificed for years, and your mother wants to know if you'll wear beige. Still, there was a part of me that hoped they'd surprise me. That maybe, just maybe, Blake would reach out, acknowledge the intersection of our worlds. But when the next family Zoom call rolled around, he barely looked up from his screen. I said something light like, "Funny coincidence, huh? Me working with your fiancé's family's company." He just smirked. "Guess that tech stuff you're doing is working out." And then he pivoted like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. After the call, I stood in my kitchen staring out the window. The city below buzzed with life, taxis, honking streetlights, blinking people chasing stories I'd never hear. And I thought, what does it mean to succeed when the people you love pretend not to see it? That question hung in the air like a fog. But so did something else, something quieter and more powerful. Maybe success isn't meant to change them. Maybe it's meant to free me. In the weeks that followed, I buried myself in the Everhart rollout. We onboarded 3 departments in record time. Eleanor called us surgical. We were efficient, responsive, and dare I say it, brilliant. Word spread. We gained press coverage. A small piece in TechCrunch. A bigger one in Forbes Women, and still, not a word from home. One afternoon, while finalizing a dashboard integration with the Everhart team, Richard called me privately. "I had dinner with Blake and Tiffany last week," he said. I braced for whatever was coming. "I mentioned you told them how impressed we are with Aether." Blake laughed and said, "Yeah, she's always been the overachiever." Richard paused. He didn't mean it kindly. I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "That sounds about right," I said. There was silence on the line. Then Richard added, "Just know we see you, Madison. Even if some people never will." I stared at my monitor long after he hung up. Because those words, simple and unsolicited, meant more than any champagne toast or press feature. They meant I was finally being seen, maybe not by blood, but by truth. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something stronger. Something I would no longer wait to be given. Something I would claim. On my own terms. For reasons I couldn't fully articulate, not even to Ethan. I wanted to be at the wedding. Maybe it was vanity. Maybe it was longing. Or maybe it was something more fragile, the desperate hope that this time, after everything, I'd be seen. Not for my resume, not for what I'd built, but for who I was, Madison Blake's sister, the daughter who had kept going when no one clapped. The wedding was set for early May at a vineyard estate in Connecticut. According to my mother, it was going to be magical, like something out of a Nancy Meyers film. She said it with pride, as though she were the one getting married. Maybe in some ways she was. I hadn't spoken directly to Blake in weeks when the invitation arrived. It came later than I expected, tucked between a credit card offer and a package from Aether's UX consultant. The envelope was elegant cream with gold calligraphy, but there it was, my name misspelled. Madison Grant plus guest. I stared at it for a full minute. I wasn't surprised exactly. But something about it still stung. I ran my fingers across the embossed lettering, wondering if it had even been him who wrote the guest list. "Do you want to go?" Ethan asked when I showed him. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I think I need to." He didn't hesitate. "Then we'll go." I started making the mental shift from founder to family member, a role I hadn't played convincingly in years. I ordered a gown, a navy satin number with a square neckline and subtle pleating. Clean, timeless, a little defiant. I booked our hotel, confirmed the RSVP, and wrote a short message on the reply card, "Looking forward to celebrating this milestone with you both." It felt formal, detached. But that was all I could manage. A week before the wedding, I called Blake. I don't know what I expected, maybe a warm catch-up, maybe even a reluctant apology. But when he answered, his voice was clipped. "Hey Maddie. What's up?" "It's been a while," I said. "I just wanted to say congrats. Big weekend coming up." "Yeah," he said. "Crazy busy. We're doing back-to-back rehearsals and last-minute adjustments." There was a pause, the kind that begs for someone to fill it. "I got the invite," I said lightly. "Looks like a beautiful venue." He exhaled. "Tiff picked it. You know her, she's all about aesthetics." Another pause. "I'll let you go," I said finally. "Just wanted to say, I'm happy for you." He mumbled something that sounded like thanks, then hung up before I could say more. Ethan was in the kitchen when I walked back in. "How'd it go?" I shook my head. He sounded busy. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Busy or avoiding? I didn't answer. There were other signs. My parents sent a group message about the rehearsal dinner, not asking if I'd be attending, just updating everyone on the menu. When my cousin shared a seating chart in the family thread, I noticed our names weren't near Blake's or our parents'. We were listed near the back beside distant relatives I hadn't seen since childhood. And then came the family photo list. It was a shared Google Doc my mom had compiled, complete with notes like bride with maternal grandparents, groom with groomsmen, parents with bride and groom. Nowhere in the list was siblings or Blake and Madison. I stared at the screen for a long while. I could have asked. I could have reminded her. But the truth was, I didn't want to beg for inclusion. Not anymore. What if Ethan said one night as we packed for the trip, "We treat this like any other business event"? I raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "We go in. We're polite. Professional. You don't shrink yourself. You don't apologize for existing. If anything, you walk in like the contract you just signed is printed on your skin." I laughed, but there was something empowering in that image. "All right," I said. "Let's go," like I just closed $40 million. When we arrived at the estate, the place looked like a movie set. Rows of white chairs faced a vine-covered arbor. Servers floated through with trays of champagne and amuse-bouche. Tiffany was radiant in her pre-ceremony glow, all air kisses and effortless glamour. Blake wore a tailored navy suit and the same unreadable expression he'd always worn when he was about to compete, detached, focused, already elsewhere. I waved at my parents from across the lawn. My mother smiled vaguely and gestured to my dress. "Oh good, you wore a solid color," she said. "It's easier to Photoshop in family photos." "No, you look beautiful." "No, I'm glad you're here, just practicality." Ethan gently took my hand. "Deep breath," he whispered. We made our way to the reception area, past table cards arranged in golden script. I scanned the list. Table 18, Madison Grant plus guest. I looked it up on the floor map. Table 18 was not in the main room. It was in the auxiliary space past the bar near the hallway to the restrooms. A corner table. Out of view. I blinked. Once. Twice. The clinking of glasses and laughter buzzed around me, a soundtrack to yet another silent dismissal. And yet I didn't move. Not for a moment. Because in that instant something inside me finally gave way, not in anger, not in grief, but in clarity. This wasn't an oversight. This was tradition. The tradition of people like me, quiet achievers, daughters in the background, women who build empires but get seated near the coat check. But not this time. This time I would remember everything. This time I would not sit quietly. The ballroom gleamed. It was the kind of wedding that belonged in glossy magazines. White orchids suspended in crystal globes, linen-draped tables, lit by soft golden candlelight, and a live string quartet playing an instrumental version of Bittersweet Symphony. Tiffany had spared no expense. And yet, as Ethan and I followed the usher toward our table, I began to notice something strange. He led us not toward the center of the room, but through a side door. Past the bar. Down a narrow hallway. When we reached the end, he paused beside a swinging kitchen door. "This way," he said, motioning us inside. I froze. Inside the kitchen, beside clanging dishes and stainless steel counters, was a small round table set for two. No centerpiece. No candles. Just two place cards, Madison, Grant, and guest. Next to us, a waiter adjusted a stack of dinner rolls. Someone barked for more ice. The scent of garlic and grease filled the air. I turned to the usher. There must be some mistake. He shook his head, uncomfortable. This is what I have on the list. Table 18. Special seating. Special. Behind us, the door swung open again. Tiffany stood there, radiant in her gown, champagne flute in hand. She smiled tight, cold. "Oh, good you found it," she said. I stared at her. She glanced around theatrically. "I figured you'd be most comfortable back here. Quiet. Away from the crowd. Isn't that what you're used to?" My throat closed. Ethan stepped forward, voice low. "That's enough." But Tiffany just shrugged. "I'm sure you'll understand, it's a family-focused event. You know how complicated dynamics can get." She held my gaze a beat too long, then turned, her dress swishing behind her like a curtain closing on a scene. I didn't say a word. Not then. I just stood there, rooted in a room I had no place being in, watching the only woman in white glide back toward the applause. Ethan reached for my hand. "Madison," but I pulled away. "I need a minute," I whispered, then walked briskly down the hallway, past the bar, past the music, past the guests clinking glasses and laughing at stories I wasn't part of. In the restroom, I locked the door and collapsed onto the tiled bench by the sink. The sob came hard and sudden. Not graceful. Not cinematic. It tore through my chest like a dam giving way after years of hairline fractures. Because this wasn't about a chair. It wasn't about a table or a seating chart or even Tiffany. It was about a lifetime of being edited out of the frame. I thought of the photo albums where my face was always slightly off-center. Of birthday cakes with Blake's name in bigger letters. Of graduation caps tossed in the air that no one bothered to catch on camera. Of every dinner where my ideas were interrupted mid-sentence, where Blake was congratulated and I was cautioned to stay humble. And now here I was, quite literally placed in the kitchen. The metaphor couldn't be clearer if someone had engraved it on the cutlery. "You don't belong here, you never did." There was a knock at the door. Madison, Ethan's voice gentle. "I'm here. Take your time." I wiped my face with the rough paper towel, avoiding the mirror. Because I didn't want to see what was there. Not yet. But as I sat there, hands trembling, I thought of Camille Rivera. Of Eleanor Wright. Of the COO from Detroit who'd emailed last week, "Your product saved our fourth quarter." These were powerful women. Smart. Decisive. And they had looked at me, not past me, and said, "We see you." So why was I still waiting for a family who never did? Why was I still hoping to be invited into a space I could have built myself? I stood slowly. Looked in the mirror finally. My mascara was smudged, but my eyes were steady. I walked back toward the kitchen, not because I planned to sit there, but because I had something to retrieve. My purse, my dignity. When I arrived, Ethan was standing, arms crossed. The staff gave us a wide berth. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low but charged. I nodded. "I'm not sitting here," I said. He smiled faintly. "Good. I was hoping you'd say that." We didn't go back into the ballroom. We walked straight out the front door. No scenes. No shouting. Just the quiet power of two people who knew their worth. In the car, Ethan reached over and took my hand. "That was brutal," he said. I stared out the window. It was clarifying. A pause. "You know what the worst part is?" I asked. He glanced at me. I really thought, for just a second, that this would be the time they saw me. Silence filled the space between us. And then I whispered, more to myself than him. But maybe I was never meant to be part of their table. He squeezed my hand. "No," he said. "You were meant to build your own." And in that moment something shifted inside me. Not the rage, not the hurt, but the sense that perhaps this was not a breaking point. It was a beginning. We didn't speak much on the drive back to Boston. The silence wasn't heavy, it was focused, sharpened by something that had finally snapped into place. Like a picture that had always been blurry suddenly coming into painful, exquisite clarity. I thought about every moment I'd stayed quiet. Every time I'd swallowed my voice to keep the peace. Every family dinner where I laughed at Blake's stories, but no one asked about my work. And then I thought about the Everhart contract. $40 million. The largest deal Aether had ever signed. And it was tied to the same family who thought I belonged in the kitchen. Who thought they could shrink me to fit the box they'd drawn decades ago. The hypocrisy stung more now that it had a dollar sign. When we reached the apartment, I went straight to my desk. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then found Eleanor Wright's number. Ethan watched me from the doorway. "Are you sure?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm clear." He stepped closer. "Then do it." I called Eleanor first. She answered on the second ring. "Madison thought you'd be relaxing this weekend." I smiled tightly. "Unfortunately, not quite." I took a deep breath. "Eleanor, I need to speak with you about the contract." There was a pause. "Is something wrong?" I'm pulling out. Silence. "Excuse me, I'm terminating the agreement. Effective immediately. We'll return the upfront portion of the licensing fee. No strings." Another pause. This one longer. "Madison, what happened?" I didn't want to get personal. I didn't want to sound petty. So I told her the truth. "I believe in Aether," I said. "And I believe in working with people who see value in people, in principle, in partnership. I can't do business with a company that comes from a family that frankly humiliates mine in a social context while shaking my hand in a boardroom." She exhaled sharply. "Madison. I had no idea." "I know. That's the thing. No one did." I let the silence hang for a moment, then added, "It's not just about me anymore. It's about what Aether represents." She didn't argue. Instead, after a long beat, she said something I didn't expect. "I respect that." I blinked. "You?" "What I do," she said. "We'll figure something else out. And Madison, you don't owe me an apology for knowing your worth." When I hung up, my chest felt lighter than it had in months. But the real storm hadn't hit yet. Because as I returned to my desk, my phone buzzed, 6 missed calls from my father, 2 from Blake, 1 from a number I didn't recognize. And then a text popped up from my mother, "Madison. What have you done?" It didn't take long for the calls to come flooding in. Blake's voice came through like a wave of heat when I finally picked up. "Are you out of your mind?" he snapped. "Do you know what you've just done to our reputation with Everhart?" I repeated calmly. He sputtered. "This affects Tiffany's family. Her uncle is furious. You embarrassed all of us." I let his words hang, then replied, "Cool and measured number. I set a boundary." He scoffed. "You've always been dramatic." "No," I said again. "I've always been quiet." "That's different." And then I ended the call. The phone rang again. My father. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked into the living room where Ethan sat with a mug of tea, watching me like someone witnessing a slow earthquake. "It's done," I said. He stood. "How do you feel?" I thought for a moment. Then I smiled. "Clean." We toasted with wine that night. Not in celebration, but in ceremony, marking the death of something old and the birth of something new. A day later, the fallout began. My mother sent long emails with phrases like "deeply disappointed" and "selfish timing." Blake posted something vague and bitter on social media about people who let pride ruin family ties. I didn't respond. Not to any of it. Because for the first time in my life, I had chosen me. And the consequences weren't burdens. They were boundaries. A few days later, I received a handwritten letter. It was from Eleanor. Inside was a simple card with embossed initials and one short message. "When you're ready to build with people who see you, call me." No strings. I placed it on my desk beside the framed photo of the original Aether prototype. And I sat down, exhaled, and smiled. Because I hadn't lost anything. I'd gained myself. Rejection has a strange way of reshaping you. First, it burns. Then it carves. And then, if you're willing to let it, it makes space for something more honest to grow. By the following Monday, my inbox had 3 unexpected subject lines. "Let's connect. Saw you at the Everhart wedding. Impressed by your stance. Aether on our radar now. Quiet strength never goes unnoticed." They weren't from friends. Not from family. They were from executives. People who had been at the wedding. who had seen something they couldn't quite explain but felt compelled to respond to. One woman, Julia Wynn, COO of a logistics firm in Seattle, wrote, "I didn't know who you were until I asked someone during the reception why the CEO of Ether left early. When I heard what happened, I Googled you in the hotel lobby. I just want you to know you walking out was the strongest brand pitch I've ever seen." Ether received 3 partnership inquiries that week, all from companies I'd been chasing for years with little response. Now they were chasing me, and I hadn't said a word. I hadn't made a speech, hadn't caused a scene, hadn't aired dirty laundry. I had simply refused to stay where I wasn't respected, and somehow, that spoke louder than anything I could have posted on LinkedIn. It was surreal, but also strangely affirming. Like the universe was whispering, "You were never invisible." They were just looking in the wrong direction. At the same time, my family went quiet. No follow-ups, no apologies, just silence. The kind that used to gnaw at me. But this time it felt like distance. Not punishment. Like space I'd chosen, not space I'd been pushed into. I spent the next few days working from home, Ethan bringing me tea and shoulder rubs and reminders that I didn't owe anyone an explanation for protecting my peace. And then one morning, as I sifted through emails, I saw a name I hadn't seen in years. Aunt Elaine. My father's younger sister. She was the only one in the family who'd ever made me feel seen as a child. She used to sneak me books about science and women in tech, whispering, "Don't let them box you in." We lost touch after she moved to Arizona, and after I suspect my father discouraged too much closeness. She was always too opinionated for his taste. The email subject line read, "You were never wrong." I opened it, heart thudding. "Madison, I heard what happened at the wedding. I wasn't invited, I never am these days, but news travels. I want you to know I've been there. I was always the difficult one. The one who didn't fit. I left quietly too. But I never stopped watching. And I've watched you grow into someone the rest of them were never ready to celebrate. But I always was, I still am. Thank you for showing the younger version of me that sometimes the ones pushed aside build bigger stages than the ones they were denied. With love and admiration, Elaine." I read it 3 times. By the end, my hands were shaking. Not with grief. With gratitude. Because in a family that always made me feel like an outlier, here was a thread of belonging. A bloodline of defiance. A quiet shared legacy of women who didn't shrink. I replied simply, "Thank you. I didn't realize I needed this until I read it. Let's not lose touch again." When I told Ethan, he smiled and said, "Looks like you weren't the only one rewriting the family narrative." And that was the truth, wasn't it? I wasn't alone. There were others like Elaine who had been pushed to the edge, who'd stepped away not in anger but in self-preservation. And now it was our time to return, not to ask for seats at someone else's table but to host our own. A few days later, I walked into a panel event on women in leadership and ethics hosted at MIT. I wasn't on the guest list. I hadn't been invited. But as the final Q&A wrapped, a moderator recognized me in the audience. "Is that Madison Grant from Ether? Would you mind coming up for a moment?" There was scattered applause. I stood slowly, walked to the front, took the mic. And I didn't tell them about Blake, or Tiffany, or the wedding. I told them about the moment in the kitchen. The chair. The choice. The exit. And how sometimes we fight hardest not to be let in but to remind ourselves we were never outside to begin with. The applause was louder this time. As I stepped down, one young woman approached me, tears in her eyes. "You don't know me," she said, "but I watched everything unfold from my table that night, and it changed me. Thank you for walking out. It helped me walk away too from a job where I was treated the same." I didn't have words, only a nod. Because that was the ripple. That was the quiet revolution. Not a viral post, not a media blast. Just one woman standing up, so others could follow. The text came on a Thursday evening just after I had finished reviewing a new UI proposal with the Ether design team. "We'd like to have dinner. Just the family. Talk some things through. You free next Sunday?" No "how are you," no preface. Just a flat invitation sent by my mother as if we hadn't spoken, only in polite, brittle exchanges for months. As if my walking out of Blake's wedding and the ripple effects that followed hadn't happened at all. I stared at the message for a long time. There was a version of me not so long ago that would have dropped everything at the hint of inclusion. A version of me that would have agonized over what to wear, what to say, how to shrink myself just enough to be acceptable but not so much that I disappeared entirely. But I wasn't her anymore. Still, I replied yes. I'll come. Ethan looked up from across the room. You don't have to do this, he said gently. I know, I replied, but I want to. Not for them, for me. He nodded, understanding what I didn't need to explain. This wasn't a plea for reconciliation. It was a full circle moment, an intentional act of clarity. Sunday arrived. I wore black. Tailored pants, a silk blouse, sharp heels. Not to impress, but to remind myself who I was. The restaurant was neutral territory, high-end, discreet, dimly lit. The kind of place my parents favored for moments they wanted to feel in control. When I arrived, they were already seated. Blake glanced up, offered a nod that was more reflex than greeting. My mother stood halfway, gave me a fleeting air kiss. My father gestured to the open chair as if I were a client and he were a banker finalizing terms. I sat down. The conversation started predictably. Weather. Stocks. My cousin's new baby. No one mentioned the wedding or the contract or the seating arrangement that became a metaphor for my entire childhood. It was like watching a play in which everyone refused to acknowledge the fire that had burned down the first two acts. Then, after the appetizers arrived, my father cleared his throat. We asked you here to clear the air, he said, hands folded neatly in front of him. We think things escalated too quickly. Misunderstandings. I sipped my water. Said nothing. My mother jumped in. We know the wedding wasn't perfect. But tensions were high. Everyone was emotional. I tilted my head. I wasn't emotional. I was clear. She flinched slightly. Blake finally spoke. Look, Maddie, what happened at the wedding, it wasn't ideal. Tiffany can be a little theatrical. You know how she is. I smiled faintly. No, Blake. I don't. Because I've never actually had a conversation with her longer than 5 sentences. He shrugged, avoiding eye contact. She was trying to manage a lot. But that whole thing with your seat, that wasn't meant to be cruel. Wasn't it? I asked softly. He looked down. The silence that followed was thick, uncomfortable for them, empowering for me. And then Blake leaned forward, clearing his throat like he was shifting gears. I actually wanted to talk to you about something, he said. Tiffany's family, after you backed out of the contract, they're scrambling. They need another solution fast. I told them I knew someone. I didn't move. He smiled like we were back in high school, and he was pitching a half-thought-out idea for a group project I'd inevitably do on my own. I think this could be a good opportunity, he said. A way to reset things. There it was. Not an apology, not a reckoning. A proposal. A chance to work together now that my value had been quantified, now that others had confirmed what he couldn't see on his own. I set my fork down. You know, I said evenly, for years I waited for this moment. I thought if I just achieved enough, you'd finally see me. Respect me, acknowledge that what I've built matters. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. But now I realize you only see me when I'm useful. Not because I'm your sister, not because you're proud, but because I've become inconvenient to ignore. His expression shifted, frustration masked by feigned confusion. It's not like that, he muttered. My voice remained calm. It's exactly like that. I turned to my parents. I didn't come here tonight hoping to be welcomed back. I came because I needed to show myself that I no longer need your approval to feel whole. My mother's eyes welled up. We didn't mean to push you away. You didn't mean to, I said, but you did, for decades. My father looked genuinely perplexed. You're doing well. You've always been strong. We thought you didn't need us. That's the lie you told yourselves, I replied, so you wouldn't have to feel guilty for not showing up. The entrees arrived. No one touched them. I reached for my purse. I won't be collaborating with Tiffany's family, I said as I stood. Aether deserves partners who see people before potential. And I do too. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. The girl who once begged to be included was long gone. As I walked toward the exit, I felt lighter. Not because they finally understood, but because I finally didn't need them to. Ethan was waiting outside, leaning against the passenger side of our car. When he saw me, he smiled. "How'd it go?" I opened the door, slid in, and exhaled. It went exactly the way it needed to. It began with an idea that had been growing quietly inside me for years, long before the contract, long before the wedding, even before Aether. The idea that the opposite of invisibility isn't attention. It's recognition. Not the kind you beg for. Not the kind that's earned by outperforming your pain. But the kind that says you belong even if no one ever said it out loud. I called the initiative visible. Just one word. But everything I had ever needed to hear. It started simply. A quarterly mentorship program for women in technology, specifically those in mid-level roles who were often passed over, underpaid, or told they were too quiet, not ready, too emotional, or worse, lucky to be here at all. I didn't build a glossy website. I didn't wait for press coverage. I just emailed 5 women I had met across the years: engineers, designers, analysts, women who stayed late, never interrupted, and had brilliance hiding under layers of caution. Within a month, those 5 turned into 20. By the end of the first quarter, we had over 100 applications, not because we promised funding or jobs, but because we promised witnessing. Every session started the same way. Not with slides or KPIs, but with one question: when was the first time you felt unseen? The answers were different, but the ache behind them, the same. And each time I listened, I remembered the kitchen table at the wedding, the empty chair at my graduation, the napkin sketch of Aether that no one asked to see. And I knew this was the work. Not just building companies, but building mirrors for women to finally see themselves in. One afternoon after a session, a young woman named Lena Flores approached me. She had been quiet during the group, listened intently, took notes like she was capturing air. Now she stood in front of me, shaking slightly. "I just wanted to say, thank you," she said. I smiled. "You showed up. That's the first step." Her voice faltered. "I've been working as a project coordinator at a mid-sized tech firm for 4 years. I manage everything: budgets, vendors, cross-functional teams. My boss calls me his right hand, but he won't promote me. Says I'm not leadership material." She looked down. I believed him. "Until I watched your story, I stayed quiet. I gave my notice yesterday," she said, eyes brimming. I blinked. "I'm starting my own operations consultancy," she added. "It might crash and burn." But I finally heard my own voice above theirs. She laughed nervously. "And you're to blame." I felt a lump rise in my throat. "Good," I whispered. "Blame me." A week later, she emailed me a photo of her new business card: Lena Flores Consulting, systems built to scale. I stared at it for a long time. Because in that moment, I didn't just see Lena. I saw myself 10 years ago sitting on the floor of my apartment with a secondhand laptop, no savings, no backup plan, no one cheering from the sidelines. Just a dream that refused to shut up. And now, she had it too. That quiet flame. That refusal. That voice that says, "I will not wait for permission to matter." At the next visible session, I shared her story, not her name, but her leap. I ended with this: we spend so much of our lives asking for a seat at the table. But sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is build the table ourselves. And then leave an open chair for the next woman who needs it. The room was silent. And then came the kind of applause that doesn't come from politeness but from resonance, from women who had been waiting for someone to say it out loud. That they were already enough. That they didn't have to earn visibility by bleeding for it. That they could choose it, every day. That night, Ethan and I walked through the city hand in hand. The air was cool, the streetlights warm. He looked at me and said, "I think visible might be the most important thing you've built." I thought about it. About the millions in revenue Aether had generated. About the awards, the profiles, the respect. And I said, "I think you're right, because success without legacy is noise. But helping someone else see themselves for the first time, that's music." Before we went home, I stopped at a bookstore and bought a blank journal. On the first page, I wrote, "For the ones who stayed quiet too long. For the ones who thought they were the only one. For the ones who are finally visible." The ballroom was quieter this time. Not because it was smaller, on the contrary, it was grand. Hundreds of women filled the velvet chairs at the National Women in Leadership Conference. Crystal lights glittered overhead and an expectant hush blanketed the space as the final speaker was announced. My name. I stepped onto the stage in a navy suit. The same shade I wore the night I walked into my brother's wedding. This time, though, it wasn't armor. It was just me. The podium was warm under my palms. I looked out at the crowd, not with fear, not with a hunger to prove myself, but with a calm certainty I belong here. I began. A few years ago, I was invited to a family wedding. My name was misspelled on the place card. My seat was in the kitchen. And I was told it wasn't personal. A soft laugh rippled through the crowd, half amusement, half recognition. I walked out of that wedding. And the next day I walked into my company headquarters and canceled a $40 million deal. Not because I was angry, but because I was clear. Eyes widened. Phones lifted. I saw people begin to take notes. For a long time I fought to be seen by a table that had already decided I didn't matter. But that night something shifted. I realized I didn't need to be at their table. I needed to build my own. I paused. Let the weight settle. And here's what I've learned since then. When you stop shrinking to fit into someone else's room, you make space for others to expand in yours. There was silence again. And then applause, not the kind that erupts quickly and fades, but the kind that builds slowly and swells like the rising of something long held back. Later, after photos and questions and thank you hugs from strangers who felt like sisters, I walked out of the ballroom and into the city night. Ethan was waiting in a car across the street. But not to go home. We had dinner reservations. Not just the two of us tonight, was something more. We arrived at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the skyline. It wasn't a gala, it wasn't a family affair. There were no place cards, no assigned seats. Just one long table set for 10. My co-founders were already there: Aisha from engineering, Jordan from marketing, and Lena Flores, who now ran her own consultancy and served as our youngest board advisor. They stood when I arrived, smiling, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Ethan pulled out my chair. "Welcome, Madam Speaker." Everyone laughed. As we toasted water, wine, tea, I looked around. This wasn't the table I had been denied. It wasn't a table I'd begged to be invited to. It was a table I had chosen. A table I had built. And that made all the difference. Someone asked what I'd said at the end of my speech. They'd missed it in the applause. I smiled, set down my glass, and repeated the words slowly. I didn't leave that table because I was angry. I left because it was too small to hold the fullness of who I've become. They sat back quiet for a moment. Then Aisha raised her glass. "To fullness." And we clinked. The city glowed behind us. The night was just beginning. I looked around and thought, this is the real ending. Not the kind that slams a door, but the kind that opens one wide enough for others to walk through, unafraid, uninvited, unapologetic. Not seeking permission. Just taking their place. This isn't just the end of her story, it's the start of yours. If you've ever been seated in the back, overlooked, or told to stay quiet, remember this. You are not invisible. You're just not where you're meant to shine. Yet.